The town of Elmridge woke each morning to the same quiet rhythm: church bells, distant traffic, and the low hum of gossip that stitched the neighborhood together. Among the names whispered over garden fences, Daniel and Claire Walkers stood apart. They were the couple people pointed to when they wanted to believe that love could last. He was a schoolteacher with a calm voice and pressed shirts. She ran the small floral shop by the square, her hands always dusted with the scent of lilies. Together they painted the picture of a life untouched by the ordinary chaos of others. Yet perfection has a strange weight. From the moment Daniel entered a room, his eyes sought her like a habit carved into his bones. At first it seemed tender, the kind of gaze that said he still adored her after 10 years of marriage. But there were moments, fleeting and sharp, when that look lingered a fraction too long. When she turned away, he didn't blink. He watched. And sometimes she felt it before she saw it. That slow chill across her skin, as if the walls themselves were narrowing. Their home on Willow Lane stood neat and bright, every curtain drawn precisely, every cup stacked in perfect alignment. It was the kind of order that could hide chaos if one looked close enough. Claire would laugh when neighbors complimented how peaceful their life seemed, yet her laugh never reached her eyes. One Sunday morning, the fog clung to the windows as Daniel brewed coffee. Claire moved about the kitchen, humming softly, unaware that he wasn't reading the newspaper but watching her reflection in the glass. The hum of the kettle filled the silence, and for a moment his hand tightened around the cup until the porcelain creaked. Outside, a neighbor waved through the mist. Daniel smiled back, his expression warm and polite. But behind the glass, his gaze stayed fixed on Claire, steady, unblinking, and heavy with something no one in Elmridge would ever notice. The kind of look that loved her too much to ever let her go. The morning light over Elmridge fell pale and uncertain through the curtains, touching Claire's face as she stirred the tea she hadn't tasted. Daniel's phone buzzed across the table, the screen lighting his features in an electric glow. He reached for it too quickly, the motion sharp enough to make the teaspoon slip from her fingers. "Work again?" she asked lightly. He nodded without looking at her. "Parents' meeting. Late nights, you know how it is." His tone had changed. Once soft and melodic, it now carried an edge that sliced through their quiet home. She told herself it was exhaustion. Everyone was tired this time of year, but the small differences began to stack like bricks in a wall she couldn't see over. The phone stayed locked now. The passcode had changed. His laughter, once shared freely, was now muffled behind closed doors. When he walked past her, she caught the scent of her own perfume. The one she'd lost a week ago, the bottle she was certain she'd left on her dresser. At the shop, her hands trembled as she arranged white roses. Her friend, a quiet woman named Eloise, asked if she was unwell. Claire smiled, said she hadn't been sleeping. That night she checked Daniel's messages while he showered, but every notification had been deleted. The emptiness on the screen frightened her more than any secret could. The silence between them grew thick. Meals passed without words. She heard him whisper once in the hallway, voice low and intimate. Yet when she entered the room, he was alone. Staring out of the window, in the bathroom mirror, Claire stared at herself and barely recognized the woman looking back. Her skin looked thinner, her eyes haunted. She pressed her palms against the counter, feeling the chill of the marble creep through her bones. That night, Daniel's phone lit the room again. A name she didn't know flashed across the screen, followed by a single message. "She suspects." Claire's breath caught, the world narrowing to the sound of her own heartbeat. Rain began to sweep across Elmridge just as the church clock struck 6. Claire stood at the kitchen window, watching streaks of water crawl down the glass. Daniel had left hours earlier, claiming a sudden meeting with the school board. He'd kissed her cheek, smiled, and promised he wouldn't be long. By 9, the smile had faded from her memory. His phone went unanswered, her messages unread. The tea on the counter had gone cold, the spoon sinking into silence. Each tick of the clock deepened the hollow in her chest. She called again, listening to the endless ringing until it blurred with the sound of the rain. When the headlights finally appeared outside, it was past midnight. The engine cut, and she caught sight of him through the thin veil of rain. His shirt untucked, hair damp, shoes covered in mud. He walked with the measured calm of someone rehearsing a story. The door opened, hinges groaning. "You're soaked," she said softly. Car broke down by the bypass, he answered, unbuttoning his cuffs. Claire frowned. It hasn't rained all evening. He froze just for a second before turning away. Then maybe the storm came to me. He smiled, but his eyes held nothing warm. The faint scent of smoke followed him as he passed, mixing with something metallic she couldn't name. He disappeared into the shower without another word. Claire stood in the hall, staring at the damp footprints leading to the bathroom. Each print looked darker than it should, as if shadowed by something thicker than water. That night she barely slept. The sound of the shower replayed in her mind, the rhythm too long, too careful. At dawn he left early, claiming another meeting. From the bedroom window she watched him drive away. Then, without thinking, she grabbed her coat, keys, and followed. The streets of Elmridge were still wet, the world quiet except for the hum of his car ahead. He didn't turn toward the school. Instead, he veered down the narrow lane that led to the old industrial yards at the edge of town. Long abandoned. Silent but for the cry of crows. Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she parked at a distance. Daniel stepped out of the car, carrying something wrapped in a dark cloth. Whatever trust remained shattered in that moment. The following week, the house on Willow Lane grew quieter, yet the silence had a pulse. Daniel had changed in ways Claire could neither explain nor ignore. His kindness was now measured, his warmth mechanical, his touch weighted with something that no longer felt like love. When she laughed at something on the television, he asked who had sent the message that made her smile. When she went to town, he demanded to know which route she took, which faces she saw. He masked it as care. The world isn't safe, Claire. People aren't what they seem, he would say, his voice calm but eyes sharp. One evening while he was at work, Claire opened the drawer of his desk searching for their insurance papers. Under a pile of receipts and old notebooks lay a sealed envelope. Her name wasn't written on it, but she recognized the neat, deliberate handwriting. The ink had bled slightly into the paper, as if written in haste. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The letter was intimate, almost loving. The words spoke of regret, of secrets shared under candlelight, of promises that could not see the daylight. She read each line twice, the tone burning into her chest. Yet as her eyes lingered on the curves of the letters, a cold thought crawled through her. The handwriting looked eerily like her own. She dropped the letter, heart pounding against the edges of her ribs. The floor creaked above her. She froze, the sound of Daniel's footsteps descending the stairs echoing through the hall. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was steady but too calm. "I was looking for the insurance forms," she replied, slipping the letter into her sleeve. Daniel stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the floorboards. "Next time, ask me first." His smile flickered like a light about to die. That night she couldn't sleep. She compared the letter to her own writing, tracing the letters side by side until the ink blurred beneath her tears. Whoever wrote it wanted her to question herself, to feel the edges of madness closing in, and by dawn, she realized it was working. The night it happened, Elmridge slept beneath a heavy storm that never reached the ground. Thunder rolled in the distance as Claire stood by the window, the letter clenched in her hand. Daniel sat behind her at the kitchen table, watching the clock. Every tick seemed louder than the rain that refused to fall. "You think I don't notice," he said finally, his tone thin and trembling. "You've been going through my things again." She turned to face him, her voice soft but steady. "I found something that wasn't meant to be hidden." His jaw tightened. "You're making things up in your head again. That's what you do when you're bored." The words struck harder than a slap. "Is that what this is to you? Some game where you twist everything I say?" Daniel rose, the chair scraping the floor like a warning. "I'm trying to protect you, Claire. From yourself." Her laugh was brittle. "Protect me? You've been lying, Daniel. There's someone else, isn't there?" He stepped forward, his eyes glinting with a strange, feverish light. "Don't say that." She tried to move past him, but his hand shot out, fingers locking around her wrist. The pressure was brutal, his breath ragged. "You'll ruin everything," he hissed. "Let go of me." She pulled away with all her strength. The motion sent her stumbling backward. The corner of the table met her skull with a sound that split the air. For a moment, the world froze. The only movement came from the slow trickle of blood that crept along the wood grain. Daniel's chest heaved. "Claire?" His voice cracked. "Claire, get up." No answer. Her eyes stayed open, unblinking, reflecting the dim kitchen light. He dropped to his knees, pressing his hand against her neck, searching for warmth that was already fading. Panic consumed him. He whispered to himself, convincing no one. It was an accident. She fell. She fell. Minutes passed before reason returned. He wiped the blood with a cloth, scrubbed the floor until the wood turned pale, and carried her to the car. Outside, the streetlight flickered, casting shadows that shifted like ghosts across the pavement. By dawn, he had a story. A perfect grieving husband's story. The smell of petrol lingered in the air long before the flames began to rise. Daniel stood in the doorway of the house on Willow Lane, his hand trembling around the lighter. The silence inside was unbearable, the kind that felt alive. He had scrubbed every surface, buried the blood-soaked cloth beneath the garden soil, and placed Claire's body back in their bed as if she were sleeping. The sight of her stillness carved something permanent into him. He struck the lighter. The flame caught quickly, feeding on the curtains first, then climbing greedily toward the ceiling. Heat swept across the hallway and Daniel stepped back, watching the house he had built turn into his alibi. When the windows shattered, he turned away, his reflection fractured in every piece of glass. By morning, Elmridge gathered outside the charred remains of the Walker home. The fire brigade found no sign of struggle, no trace of another story. The neighbors wept for Claire, the kind woman who sold them flowers for their children's birthdays. Daniel stood among them, eyes red, voice trembling, the perfect image of grief. She was asleep, he told the officers, voice cracking at the edges. I tried to get to her, but the smoke was too thick. They believed him. For a while, Detective Rowan Marks, a man with sharp eyes and slower words, lingered longer than the others. As the last embers cooled, he knelt beside a patch of scorched timber and lifted a photograph half-burned at the edges. It showed Daniel and Claire smiling, but something behind them caught his attention. The reflection in the window was wrong. Daniel's arm wasn't around Claire in the reflection. It hung by his side. That image spread like a whisper through the station. Meanwhile, Daniel played his part to perfection. He gave interviews, attended the vigil, and accepted casseroles from sympathetic neighbors. Yet at night, when he looked at his hands, he swore he could still see the faint smear of red along his fingertips. The house was gone, but the fire had not burned everything. Some things cling to the living, no matter how much they beg to be erased. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the small room with a constant grating buzz. Daniel sat alone at the metal table, his wrists resting neatly beside a paper cup of water he hadn't touched. Across from him, Detective Rowan Marks flipped through a folder, the sound of each page scraping against the next cutting through the silence like a blade. Funny thing about fires, Marks began, his voice even. They burn fast, but they don't hide everything. You can tell a lot from what survives. Daniel's jaw tightened. You've had the reports. It was an accident. Marks leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And yet your car tires were found half a mile from the house near the industrial yards. You never mentioned going there. A flicker crossed Daniel's face. He shifted in his seat, the muscles in his neck stiffening. I went for air, to clear my head. Before or after your wife died? The question hit the room like a physical blow. Daniel's hands clenched, knuckles whitening. A flash of that night flickered through his mind. Claire falling, the thud, the sudden stillness, the smell of smoke clawing at his throat. Mark slid a photograph across the table, the scorched picture of Daniel and Claire, its edges curling inward. The reflection in the glass behind them captured like a silent witness. Something about this doesn't fit, Mr. Walker. Your reflection says more than your story ever did. Daniel stared at the image, his composure fracturing. Sweat gathered at his temples, trailing down to the collar of his shirt. You don't understand, he muttered. She made me lose control. Then tell me how you tried to fix it. Did you think the fire would wash it away? Daniel's breath hitched. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with every tick of the clock. His voice broke into a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen. Marks closed the folder. Accidents don't require lies, Daniel. The detective stood, leaving him in the harsh glare of the light, alone with the echo of his own guilt. Outside the glass, officers watched in silence, already knowing the truth. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and damp coats. Daniel stood at the center, the cuffs on his wrists glinting under the pale light. His eyes, once calm and precise, now carried the hollow look of a man who had watched everything he loved turn to ash. The judge's voice cut through the murmur of the room like a verdict already decided. "Mr. Daniel Walker, the court finds you guilty of manslaughter in the death of Claire Walker." The words hung there, heavy and final. The charge was lesser than murder, but no one in Elmridge saw mercy in it. The sound of Claire's mother sobbing from the second row was the only noise that broke through the silence that followed. During the confession, Daniel had spoken in a voice stripped of defense. "It was an accident," he said, staring at his hands. "I never meant to hurt her. She fell. I panicked." No one believed him fully, yet everyone wanted the story to end. The photographs, the fire reports, the burned reflection. They were enough to close the file, but not the wound. When the verdict came, Detective Rowan Mark stood near the doorway, arms folded, watching Daniel being led away. He had seen guilt before, but this kind was different. It didn't roar or plead. It lingered, quiet and poisonous, like smoke after a fire. Weeks later, Elmridge returned to its quiet rhythm. The floral shop reopened under new management, and the house on Willow Lane was demolished. The soil turned over and flattened. Still, locals crossed the road rather than walk past where it once stood. In the old churchyard, a white stone bore Claire's name, carved with a simple epitaph, "She loved too much." On misted mornings, petals from nearby graves gathered against it, as though the town's sorrow kept drifting back to her. Daniel would never return to Elmridge. His sentence ensured that. Yet in every whispered conversation, his name still lingered at the edge of silence, carried like a warning. Love, once tender and bright, had become the blade that ended them both.